And and here we go. Episode 10. Caseo, Chapter 7. Let's begin now. Bailey awakens with the sun tickling her face and warmly beckoning her to wake. She lays on the sand a good 20 yards from the water and wonders how in the world did she get here. She carefully places her hands behind her and cautiously pushes herself upward in a sitting position. Despite the sand oozing through her fingers and her hands sinking deeper, she's able to get enough leverage to sit up. While her head is still spinning and swimming and sorting out remnants of cobwebs, Bailey is greeted with a sickening dread and a passing moment of nausea. She gradually sits up more securely as her head begins to clear and the discomfort of the sand in her time-out uniform comes to the fore. She looks down at her bosom and sees that her uniform shirt has been torn even farther as she instinctively covers up with both hands. She slowly stands and sits right back as she begins to feel lightheaded again. Bailey exhales outwardly as she takes another long look around. Bailey looks around and sees so many tall trees behind her, carefully concealing most of the shoreline. She has no idea how she was saved. Maybe it was Bigfoot again. She didn't know. If so, then where is he? Bailey looks at the sand around her and sees two long marks from the water to where she is sitting. It would appear that someone managed to save her from the water and drag her to shore. But who? If it was not Bigfoot, maybe it was John or even Dean. If so, then where are they now? She looks carefully around the area and sees small footprints that move to the trees and brush from behind her and then disappear among the shrubbery. Bailey tries to stand up again, and this time is successful. She brushes off her suit and removes her timeout mask and pours out the sand that seems to have found a home around her nose and her eye crevices. Her shift in motion causes her left breast to pop out of her shirt as she instinctively tucks it back and nervously looks around, hoping that no one saw her or that she gave anybody a thrill. She looks at her mask and decides to see if she can use it to cover her torn shirt. Maybe even then give it some desperately needed support that she needed there. She remembered what Brady said about their uniforms when Judge wanted to remove his surgeon mask. He told them that if any part of their suit is altered or removed, it would neutralize their superpowers and their suits would come off. But nothing happened to her. Her mask is easily removed and altered into a makeshift bra and patch. She thought that Brady might have been just saying that to irritate his brother. Bailey needed a bra more than she needed a mask. So that's what she was going to use as far as she was concerned. Once the alternation is finished, she walks gingerly to the shoreline to rinse off the excess sand from her face and hands. She puts one foot in the water and quickly recoils as something moves under her toes. She concludes that she must have stepped on a turtle or a crab, but on a closer look, she's surprised to see many small little creatures like moving stones, moving in a ballet motion back and forth. She looks at them closer and says to herself that she remembers seeing something like this when she was with her daughter on one of the islands on Earth. For that moment, she forgets where she is, and the big mystery of how she managed to get to shore. Her smile fades as she looks back at the beach with her eyes trailing the long mark in the sand where she was dragged and the smaller prints. Bailey realizes two things. Whoever it was had very small feet, and she wondered who that person was or where they went. She slowly moves to the area and begins to examine the small prints. It looks human. At least that had some consolation. But who? Who could it be? Clearly it wasn't Dean or John either. Their feet were too large. Bailey notices a small trail area and decides to follow it. Once she sets foot on the path, she sees movement. Wherever it was gone in the blink of an eye. She didn't see what it was and exactly where it went, but there was something in the tall trees around her and enough brush to hide behind. She smiles to herself when she thinks about Cat and now how she envied her sharp cat-like eyes. My, how she could use her now. She hears the sound and turns again to the area. She catches a glimpse of something human running away from her. She yells out, "Hey, come back! I'm a friend. Please don't run off." She moves slowly toward that area where she again hears the sound again, but only higher in the trees. She looks up hurriedly and sees movement in the trees. The light bends through the leaves, striking her about her face and obscuring most of her view. However, she did see a small tail. She reasoned that it must have been a tree squirrel the whole time, and that left her still puzzled. She did see the small footprints that seemed like a small man's, but if that was the case, where was he? Or she? How could she find her, and how did she get to safety to shore? Moves over to the stately oak tree, hoping to examine it closely. To her delight, she sees not only one tree squirrel, but a trio of squirrels going about their business and running up and down the trees looking for nuts and all. Above her, more noise, scampering, she would describe. Bailey looked up and sees them moving energetically with zest as they move carefully through the branches of the trees. Her eyes are again pounded by the brightness as she quickly looks away and shields her eyes with her hand. She is left looking to the ground with white spots before her eyes as she waits for this to clear up. Her attention is once again captured by a loud skirmish in the trees where apparently the little furry creatures are having a bit of a tantrum or disagreement among themselves. Bailey sees a group of squirrels from higher up the trees come gliding down over to that disputed spot. One particular squirrel seemed to be the subject of the attack and getting pulverized by the others. He begins to retreat only to be broadsided by another as he falls mercilessly to the ground. The fall is high and damaging as he strikes the unseen branches around his head and finishes falling lifelessly to the ground. "Oh, dear," says Bailey in alarm as she moves carefully over to where the small creature had landed. But before she can reach it, he quickly scampers off and up the tree to safety. The sounds of something else behind her catches her attention. Bailey swings her head around and sees nothing. But this time, she's convinced that sound was not from a small squirrel. Someone is there and watching her. She's played the game before in grade school. It was called hide and go seek. The trick was to be nonchalant about it and pretend that you are oblivious to where they are. Then they will relax their guard and then boom, you could catch them. Bailey carefully looks over to her left as she sees two small brown eyes peeking through the brush looking at her. Bailey's eye contact betrays her as the person in question, realizing he has been seen, and he quickly bolts away from her. Instinctively, Bailey yells out, "Stop! Stop!" He doesn't stop and runs to the shoreline, looking over his shoulder. Bailey, as timeout, used her speed and races right past him and then freezes time. Time freeze. She strolls over to the frozen running statue and finds a young boy with brown, unkempt, straight hair and dressed in a fur vest. She's intrigued by what she sees. Caught up in the moment, she walks curiously up to him and looks at him in the face. Bailey doesn't know him, and yet he's strangely familiar to her. Now time unfreezes. A second later, time resumes, and the momentum of this frozen lad is unleashed as it comes blazingly straight at Bailey, knocking her to the ground. The collision claims both at first, as both lay stunned motionless on the ground. Bailey has taken the worst of the hit as she staggers up to the sitting position. The young man is now standing on his feet and is very angry himself. He's about ready to run off, but for some strange reason he hesitates. Bailey rolls back over to the ground away from him on her side as she grimaces in pain and holding her head with both hands. "Are you okay?" he asks nervously as he edges closer to her. "Oh, I don't know," she says softly and shaking her head. The young man looks with sympathy on her condition. Then he becomes emboldened in thought as he turns around and looks at the direction where she came from. With puzzlement, he turns back to her and says, "How did you do that?" "Do what?" asked Bailey, still holding her throbbing head. "How did you get in front of me so fast? I never saw you." The picture there is depicting the discussion. "I'm a fast runner," says Bailey flippantly as she moves her hands slowly away from her head, making sure it hadn't fallen off. "So who are you, and what are you doing here?" asked the brown-eyed boy. "I'm Bailey Wilder. I'm from Earth," she says casually, as if that would be sufficient. The boy does a quick double take and says nothing as Bailey quickly assesses this young boy to be anything from maybe 12 to 14 years old. "Any more questions?" asks Bailey as she lightly starts to brush the forest powder dust from her body. The young man looks with surprise at her and says nothing. "What's your name, young man?" asked Bailey, trying not to sound too condescending. "My name is Caseo," he answers with no precociousness or hesitation. "Caseo? You mean like the watch?" asked Bailey with a smile and a lifting of both eyebrows. The young man says nothing and looks puzzled at what she just says. She explains further. "When my daughter and I used to run, we used to use a stopwatch made by the Caseo Clock Company to check our speed." "Me?" rebuttals Caseo with confusion. No, not you. You don't understand. I mean, like the company that makes the wristwatch," answers Bailey, adding unintentionally to the confusion. Caseo says nothing as he shrugs the matter aside and says, "You said you and your daughter used to run?" "Yes," says Bailey succinctly. "Why? Why would you run? Were people chasing you?" With a smile, Bailey admits, "Not usually." Although we did have some trouble from time to time with one of our neighbor's big dogs trying to jump through the fence wherever we ran by. So, why did you run then? Asked Caseo, straining for understanding. For fun and exercise mostly, says Bailey, with a small smile, realizing how silly this must sound to a 14-year-old boy. So that's why you're such a fast runner then, answers Caseo, as if that now makes sense. Well, not exactly, admits Bailey. Casio's befuddlement changes to a different disposition as he replies, I like you. You seem to be a nice person, even though I don't think I understand you. But I guess that's all right, too. People don't always understand me either. Thank you. I like you, too, utters Bailey with a pleasant surprise at her own. Come on, I want to show you something special, says Caseo as he stands up quickly and begins to walk away from her. Bailey carefully stands up, still conscious of her torn suit around her chest and her hero mask barely serving as a makeshift patch. After they walk over to an area with heavy trees, Bailey sees something that could be very useful to her. Look, a mitten, says Bailey, pointing to it. Her first thought is that maybe she could use it in covering her torn suit. Caseo stands back as a grin begins to stretch itself across his face as Bailey reaches down to touch it. Bailey slowly bends down to pick it up and is horrified that the small mitten not only has two small black eyes but a mouthful of teeth. She lets out a short scream and drops the mitten to the ground and backs away quickly. That was no mitten, she states to Caseo, who seems neither shocked nor surprised by her statement or reaction. It's a dead squirrel, he answers. Are you sure it's dead? Replies Bailey, still reeling from alarm. Caseo walks over to it and puts it on his hand as he says softly, Poor fellow, his body is still warm. He must have just died. Be careful, maybe he's not dead. Maybe he's just stunned, Bailey replies with nervous trepidation. Caseo holds it out to Bailey as if to challenge her to touch it. Bailey needs this young man's trust right now, and the last thing she wants to do is alienate him. She sucks at a fresh bit of air and pastes a large, fully smile on her face as she reaches out to touch it. There's the picture that shows that. Caseo is intrigued by her sudden interest in the small animal that managed to terrify her only moments ago. He liked what she was doing as she reaches out to him. He is dead. See? As he holds the squirrel behind the neck and dangles the limp body. I'm told that these little squirrels are identical to the Siberian flying squirrels that you have back on Earth. It's funny how you thought it was a mitten on the ground. When the Siberian flying squirrel flies, they do look like a flying mitten. Did you know they can glide up to 250 feet and rarely fall and miss their branch and end up like this poor fellow? As Caseo begins to examine the small creature closer, you see its skin or membranes here? It has two thin layers of muscles that enable it to change the curvature of the glide. It's really neat. You see, this front part is supported by a rod or cartridge that extends to the little guy's wrist. And their ears. I just love their ears. You see how they're tucked in? That helps them in gliding. And yes, their tail too is neat. Their tail acts like a rudder when it is gliding. Just before it lands, the squirrel reuses its tail as a braking parachute to stop itself vertically when it lands. They rarely mess up. Bailey moves closer to it and carefully begins to stroke the dead flying squirrel, partly with curiosity to see if its fur is as soft as it looks. She looks up to the tall trees and sees a great deal of little squirrels beaming with black pearl eyes as they take turns individually looking out one of the many knotholes in the tree with inquisitiveness as to what Bailey and Caseo are doing. Maybe the little fellow was trying to impress a girl squirrel. Caseo nods and says, maybe so. I know the males win the hearts of the females by their flying antics. Or lack of them, quips Bailey with a small grin. Yeah, poor fellow. Caseo bends down and returns the little squirrel to the ground exactly where he had picked it up and says, don't worry about him. They usually come out at night to feed and will likely take care of his body. You mean, asked Billy, stopping a minute. I don't know. On Earth, I imagine they're eaten by scavenger birds, bugs. But here on Notlam, it's different, concludes Caseo with no further explanation. Bailey is about to ask what the difference between Caseo, when Caseo spots something deeper in the brush, and with biting enthusiasm, he says, quick, come here. I want to show you something special. You like plants? I will stop right there.